Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Philosophical Flicks. We have an exciting and thought-provoking journey planned for you today. We are taking a leap into the realm of philosophy and politics, a realm where the boundaries between reality and imagination blur, where the conventional rules of politics are rewritten, and where the ancient wisdom of some of the greatest minds humanity has ever known is brought to bear on the modern world. In today's episode, we explore a hypothetical scenario that is as intriguing as it is unlikely. We ask, what if? What if the ancient philosophers Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates were alive today? What if they decided to plunge into the turbulent waters of contemporary politics? What if they were to run for office and win? Imagine the shockwaves that would ripple through the political landscape as these towering figures of ancient wisdom ascended to power. Picture the headlines, the debates, the campaign slogans. Imagine the merchandise, the t-shirts, the bumper stickers, the coffee mugs, all emblazoned with catchy philosophical quotes. But beyond the novelty and amusement of this hypothetical scenario, there are deeper questions to ponder. How would their philosophies shape our politics, our society, our lives? What would their leadership mean for our country? So buckle up as we plunge into this intriguing hypothesis and imagine a world where Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates are at the helm. So with that said, let's set the stage for the hypothetical election. Imagine for a moment Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates are elected to run the country. A surprising turn of events, to say the least, wouldn't you agree? Now, after taking the plunge, let us dive headfirst into what the hypothesis would look like. Picture this. The ballots of voters have been counted, the results are in, and the triumvirate of ancient wisdom has emerged victorious. The political landscape has been irrevocably altered, and the world is left in awe and perhaps a smidgen of bewilderment. Imagine the headlines the next day. Plato paves the way to power. Aristotle ascends. Socrates soars to success. The media would have a field day, wouldn't they? But perhaps the most amusing part would be the campaign leading up to this unprecedented election. Consider the campaign slogans. Plato, with his idealist principles, might have run on "Make the Republic real." Aristotle, the realist, could have chosen "Politics for the people." And Socrates, our beloved questioner, might have perplexed us all with "Know that you know nothing." One can't help but chuckle at the thought of the televised debates. Plato, lost in his world of forms, Aristotle, ever the observational scientist, and Socrates, turning every question into an existential crisis. The moderators would certainly have their work cut out for them, keeping our philosophical trio on track and within their allotted time. And let's not forget the merchandise, the t-shirts, the bumper stickers, the coffee mugs, all emblazoned with catchy quotes and the faces of our newly elected leaders. You'd have Plato's One and the Many, Aristotle's Golden Mean, and Socrates' Unexamined Life. I'd wager those would sell out in a heartbeat. But as we chuckle at the absurdity of it all, we should also ponder the implications. What would it mean to have these great minds at the helm? How would their philosophies shape our politics, our society, our lives? Indeed, it would be an election for the ages, but what would it mean for the country? Plato, a philosopher king at the helm of our country, how would that play out? Imagine this scenario. Plato, the disciple of Socrates and mentor to Aristotle, governing our nation. Fascinating, isn't it? But to understand how Plato would rule, we first need to delve into his political philosophy. Plato was a firm believer in the concept of philosopher kings. He proposed that those who have spent their lives seeking knowledge and wisdom should be the ones to guide a society. Plato argued that these philosopher kings, with their profound understanding of justice, virtue, and the greater good, would be best equipped to lead. In his magnum opus, The Republic, Plato detailed his vision of an ideal state. The society he envisioned was divided into three classes: the producers, the auxiliaries, and the guardians. The producers, comprising farmers, craftsmen, and traders, would meet the society's material needs. The auxiliaries, essentially the soldiers, would protect the city. And at the top of this societal pyramid, the guardians, wise philosopher kings, would rule. Plato's ideal state was a meritocracy, where individuals were placed in classes based on their abilities and virtues, not their birthright. He believed that justice in a society is achieved when each class performs its designated role without interfering in the duties of the other classes. But Plato's philosopher kings were not self-appointed. They were selected through a rigorous process of education and testing, designed to identify those with the highest philosophical acumen and leadership qualities. So if Plato were to govern our nation, we could expect a radical restructuring of society. Merit would be paramount and wisdom would sit on the throne. Yet it's worth pondering whether such a system, seemingly perfect on paper, could function seamlessly in reality. Plato's political ideologies, while revolutionary and thought-provoking, were not without their critics. Some argue that his ideal state borders on authoritarianism, with too much power vested in the philosopher kings. So, with Plato in charge, we might all be living in a philosopher's paradise, or perhaps not. Aristotle, the pupil of Plato, yet with a different view of politics, how would his leadership differ? Aristotle, the great philosopher, was known for his practical approach to politics. Unlike his teacher, Plato, who envisioned an ideal society led by philosopher kings, Aristotle had a more grounded perspective. He saw the importance of balancing the interests of diverse groups within a society. Aristotle believed in constitutional government, a concept that was quite radical for his time. He argued that the best form of government was one that was ruled by laws and not by individuals. For Aristotle, the rule of law was a safeguard against tyranny, ensuring that power was not concentrated in the hands of a few. Aristotle's political ideology also emphasized the importance of the middle class. He viewed them as a stabilizing force that could prevent the excesses of the rich and the resentment of the poor. He believed that a strong and prosperous middle class was the backbone of a healthy society. Now, let's contrast this with Plato's ideologies. Plato, as we know, proposed the rule of philosopher kings, believing that those with philosophical wisdom were best suited to govern. He prioritized harmony and unity, often at the expense of individual freedoms. In comparison, Aristotle's approach seems more democratic. He valued individual freedoms and believed in the principle of shared governance, where power is distributed among the citizens. His focus on the middle class also contrasts with Plato's emphasis on the wisdom of an elite few. However, Aristotle was not an advocate for unrestricted democracy. He saw the potential for mob rule and was wary of the masses making uninformed decisions. So while his approach may have been more inclusive than Plato's, it was not without its checks and balances. In the grand scheme of things, Aristotle's political ideologies provide a more balanced approach to governance, acknowledging the roles and interests of different sections of society. His focus on the middle class and the rule of law could potentially offer a more pragmatic and inclusive form of leadership. Aristotle might bring a more balanced approach to leadership, with a focus on the middle class. But how would this harmonize with Plato's philosophical paradise? Socrates, the mentor of Plato and a fierce critic of democracy, how would he influence the government? Well, let's take a journey into the mind of Socrates, shall we? Known for his Socratic method, Socrates was a unique thinker. He didn't pen down his ideas, but his conversations, as recorded by his students, reveal a lot about his philosophies. Socrates was not a fan of democracy, the very system we hold dear today. He equated it to a ship, where everyone thinks they have the right to steer, regardless of their knowledge and competence. A rather controversial perspective, don't you think? But hold on, there's more to it. Socrates believed that just as a ship needs a skilled navigator, a state needs an enlightened ruler, someone who understands justice and the good. He had faith in the philosopher king, a wise individual capable of making just decisions for the betterment of society, quite a contrast to Plato's ideal republic and Aristotle's preference for constitutional government, isn't it? But Socrates' critique of democracy wasn't just about the system, it was about the people too. He argued that the masses could be easily swayed by rhetoric and manipulation, leading to unjust decisions. This is where his Socratic method comes in, a way of questioning that exposes ignorance and encourages critical thinking. Imagine Socrates in the government. He'd probably be the one questioning every decision, challenging every policy, and pushing everyone to think deeper. Yes, he would be that nagging voice constantly reminding us to question, to reflect, and to seek wisdom. He might not agree with Plato's philosopher kings or Aristotle's mixed constitution, but he'd certainly bring a unique perspective to the table. A perspective that challenges us, that makes us uncomfortable, but also one that pushes us to strive for wisdom and justice. Socrates, with his disdain for democracy, could create a real stir in the government, But how would this trio work together? Stay tuned to find out. So, what would a country run by Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates look like? In our imaginative journey, we've traversed the political landscapes of each of these great minds. Now let's bring them together to form a peculiar, yet intriguing, triad of leadership. Picture this. Plato, the Prime Minister, focuses on the big picture, striving to create his ideal republic. He'd likely be the dreamer of the group, envisioning a society of philosopher kings and enlightened citizens. But remember, Plato was a fan of strict social hierarchy, so expect a well-ordered society, perhaps with a touch of rigidity. Now enter Aristotle, the Chancellor of Exchequer. He'd be the pragmatic one, balancing Plato's lofty ideals with his grounded approach. Aristotle emphasized the middle ground, so he'd likely push for policies that promote balance and moderation. And yes, he would probably be the one to remind Plato that not everyone can be philosopher kings, lest we end up with a nation of daydreamers. And then we have Socrates, the president, questioning every decision, every policy, and every law. A Socratic society would be one of constant debate and discussion, a place where no idea goes unchallenged. Imagine a parliament session with Socrates. It would be less of a debate and more of an endless philosophical discussion. You'd probably need an extra large pot of coffee for those meetings. It might sound like they would be at each other's throats, but remember, these three shared a common love for wisdom and truth. They'd argue, debate, and challenge each other, but always in the pursuit of a better society. So, would it be a utopia or a dystopia? Well, that's a question for the ages. Perhaps it would be a bit of both, a utopia of intellectual enlightenment and a dystopia of never-ending debates. And as for the citizens, well, let's just say they'd need to brush up on their philosophy. In the end, a country run by these three philosophers would certainly be interesting, to say the least. But whether it would be a utopia or a dystopia, we can only speculate. And so, we arrive at the end of our hypothetical journey. We've traversed the political landscapes of Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, and even imagined a country under their collective leadership. It's been quite an intellectual adventure, hasn't it? We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. But remember, these philosophical ideologies are not just about shaping a society. They can also guide us in our personal lives. As we sign off, let's ponder on their wisdom and strive to apply it in our own lives. Plato teaches us to dream big, Aristotle reminds us to stay grounded, and Socrates encourages us to question and seek truth. These are valuable lessons that can help us navigate the complex world we live in. Thank you for joining us for another episode into the world of philosophical flicks. We hope our journey into the minds of these philosophers has sparked your own thirst for wisdom. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Remember, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. This is a lesson from our philosophers. Let's make our world a better place, not just for us, but for future generations. Stay curious, stay philosophical, and stay tuned for more philosophical flicks.